Let's move on to question number 9. If nominal wages adjust slowly to changing economic conditions, then a decrease in the price level will cause the real wage rate to rise and employment and real output to fall. The description of the impact of a decrease in the price level on real output is used to explain A. A shift in the aggregate demand curve, B. The negative slope of the aggregate demand curve, C. A shift in the short-run aggregate supply curve, D. The vertical shape of the long-run supply curve, or E. The positive slope in the short-run aggregate supply curve. Now the first step to solve this problem is to draw an aggregate supply model. Right over here it shows I have the long run aggregate supply, which is vertical y-axis, short run aggregate supply curve to the right. And now after you made a model of the long run aggregate supply and short run aggregate supply, you want to make an aggregate demand model that has price level on the y-axis and real GDP on the x-axis. Now the next step is to figure out whether aggregate supply or aggregate demand is affected by changes in the nominal wages. Now remember, the factors that affect aggregate demand are consumers' expenditures on goods and services, investment by companies on capital goods, government expenditures on publicly provided goods and services, and net exports, which is exports minus imports. A good hint is that whenever you guys see net, that most likely means there is a subtraction involved between two entities. Now the factors that affect aggregate supply are changes in the size of the quality of labor, technological innovations, increase or decrease in wages, an increase or decrease in production cost, changes in the producer taxes and subsidies, and changes in inflation. While wages are part of aggregate supply, nominal wages are different because nominal wages are sticky. Nominal wages are sticky because in the short run, these payments are slow to rise when there are labor shortages and slow to fall even when there is a significant level of unemployment. Now A and B are incorrect because from the factors that affect aggregate demand, nominal wages do not affect the aggregate demand. Now A and B are a shift in the aggregate demand curve and a negative slope of the aggregate demand curve. Now these two are not factors that would now nominal wages are not affected by the demand curve. Therefore, A and B are easily taken out as the correct answers. Now C is incorrect because there are no factors that shift the aggregate supply curve. Now C was a shift in the short run aggregate supply curve, but like I said, nominal wages does not shift the supply curve or demand curve. Therefore, C can also be thrown out. Now D is incorrect because a vertical shape of the aggregate supply curve would mean the economy is at full employment. Now, if you guys need a more detailed explanation about the relationship between short-run aggregate supply and long-run aggregate demand, there's a link provided right over here in this PowerPoint, which I will make available towards the end in the link of this YouTube video. So therefore, the correct answer is E, the positive slope of the short-run aggregate supply curve. Now, E is the correct answer because the equilibrium points of the long-run aggregate supply and the short-run aggregate supply will move along up the line because the increase in nominal wages is increasing the real wage to rise and real outputs and employment to fall. So therefore, E is the correct answer.